right.
Now George.
And now me. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay?
What? What?
Yeah, what?
George, you want to dim the lights a little bit?
Yeah, why don't we do?
I get one. I get it.
Okay. As Brendan said, I'm George, WBØIIS. I'm kind of the technical person behind the Missouri Digital Group. And this presentation came out of the fact that I get lots of questions. At Winterfest, at Hamfest, where we have a table, people come up and say, how do I do this? How do I do that? So what I thought would be is to just kind of give you some basics if you've got a radio on how to program it. And this is going to be an interactive presentation, so if you got a question, raise your hands. We'll try to answer them as we go along. If we get too many, then we'll have to pick up the pace. My goal is to get you started with your code plug, get you going. If you got a radio from somebody else, you bought one that was used, somebody stuck your ID and your call sign in it, and you haven't a clue as to how it got there, this will help you do that. Before we get started, just as a show of hands, how many people have a digital radio? Good. How many have a fusion radio? How many have a DMR radio? Quite a few. Okay, anybody have a D-Star radio? We've got a few of those. So who all has all three? A few. Good. Glad to see that as a digital guy from that aspect. We're not going to cover the advanced stuff this time. We're just kind of going into basics so that you can get a channel in your radio, make a modification to your radio, that sort of thing. Like, for example, the Missouri Digital Group just added Kansas City wide. They're also on DMR to our slot number 1 on our DMR repeater. So if you got a radio and you want to program that in, you need to know how to do that. So as we go along, the first thing is, what's a code plug? Well, that's kind of an archaic term. Back in the days when I was doing commercial radio, the early synthesized radios had an electrically programmed PROM, or chip, that they put in the radio to configure the radio. And the technicians call that a code plug. You put the code in the radio to tell the synthesizer what frequencies, what PL tone, any sort of other information that the manufacturer needed to display on the display, so on and so forth. So that kind of stuck and carried over to DMR because DMR is a commercial radio. The other thing is called the CPS. You probably heard that term. It does not stand for code plug software. It actually came from customer programming system that the service shops used to program their customer radios, or if you were like my employer, Ameren, we were a self-service organization, so we programmed our own radios and we used CPSs to do that. I've developed over the years a first rule of code plugs. They are never done, particularly the amateur ones. You're always tweaking, changing, modifying your code plug. That's the fun part about doing amateur radio. You can kind of make modifications as you go along. So the key thing to making a code plug or programming your radio is to gather the information that you're going to need. And there are several sets of information for DMR. In fact, DMR is probably the one that requires you to have the most information before you sit down and program your radio. Fusion is probably the easiest. You need to know your call sign. That you can probably figure out. DMR is a little different. You're going to have to get some information. First piece of information is your DMR ID. If you've already got a radio and you're already on DMR, you already have that. You have to have that. Because DMR was a commercial system, the radios use a numeric ID to identify the user. There's an organization called radioid.net that will assign a numeric number to your call sign. And that's the first step. The next thing you need to know is your repeater or hotspot frequency. Well, that's pretty simple. Most everybody could figure that one out. The next thing you need to know is a term called color code. Color code is a digital software version, really, of a private line or CTCSS code. Except in the DMR world, it's called color code, and it's a number 1 through 15. How do you know what that is? We'll get into that. The next thing you need to know is your talk group ID. This is a little more challenging. The talk group ID is really that digital channel that you're going to use to talk on the DMR radio. There's a talk group ID for STL Metro talk group. There's a talk group ID for Kansas City Wide. There's a talk group called Worldwide, depending on what network you're on. There's a talk group called America, North America, USA, a Sweden talk group, German talk groups. There are basically thousands and thousands of talk groups across the world. But if you want your radio to listen in on something in England, you need to know what the talk group number is for England, so that when you key up your hotspot or your repeater, it will switch to that digital channel so you can hear the traffic.
Can you tell us where to find these too?
Yeah. Yes?
Is that something like the rooms that Fusion has?
Yes, very similar to WiRES X rooms, and it's also very similar to D-Star reflectors. And it's also similar to Fusion reflectors, so it gets confusing. But you can think of talk group as a WiRES X room from a Fusion standpoint. The next thing you need to know is the time slot. DMR, unlike the other systems, D-Star and Fusion, allow 2 voice channel streams on 1 repeater. Typically not your hotspots, but all the repeaters around here are spitting out a digital stream that has 2 slots for voice. So you can basically have 2 simultaneous conversations. So right now today on the MDG D-Star repeater, or a DMR repeater, we have Kansas City Wide on 1 slot, we have St. Louis Metro on the other. So you can talk around the St. Louis area to all the guys that are constantly on St. Louis Metro, or if you want to talk to Kansas City, you switch your channel. In the same repeater, you can talk to Kansas City, and they can be going at the same time. So that's kind of the beauty of DMR. Okay. The next thing you need to know, and this is probably the most confusing, and I get most of the questions on this, is the zone. What is a zone? You'll see that in the software. A zone is a collection of channels to be displayed on your radio. That's probably the simplest way to put a zone. If you create a new channel and you don't put it in a zone, you will not see it on your display. And the number 1 question I get is, what happened to my channel after I programmed my radio? And first thing I ask is, did you put it in a zone? Oh, no, I forgot that. You know, it's one of those duh moments. So you'll be creating in your hotspot or in your radio, multiple channels for a hotspot or for a repeater, because you need one for each talk group that you're going to use. Yes?
I'm using DroidStar, which is an iPhone app for DMR.
Right.
And I get a drop down, I think they're servers, I don't know what the real name is. It's like BM, DMR Plus, Free DMR, HB. What are those things called that they're giving me in that drop down list?
They're giving you in the drop down the networks.
Okay.
In DMR, there are multiple networks. Brandmeister is the most popular. You know, there's also TGIF, there's other networks, and they're also giving you servers in those networks that you connect the DroidStar to hear traffic and communications.
So how do I know what rooms are on what networks?
You have to go to the web and start searching.
Okay.
So, for example, the question come up, let me just see if I can get out of here real quick. There's a website called Brandmeister Network. If you go there, you go to information, you go to talk groups, and it will start listing every talk group that's available on that network. You've got a search tool to use so that if you put that in, you'll find the particular talk group that you might be looking for. Now, you know, somebody says, Cliff's favorite statement is it depends. Well, you can put in the alphanumerics, but if you don't have the right alphanumerics, you may not find the talk group you're looking for, but you can find them. The easier way to look them up, particularly for repeaters, is through a couple other websites, which I'll get to in a minute, but that's where they are. So once you have all that information, let me get back into my slideshow here. Once you have all that information, if this is the first time you're doing it, I've created a few hints for you. Hint number one, if you bought that radio or somebody gave it to you and they put your ID in it, your call sign said, "Here, Dolores, have fun," the first thing you're going to want to do is download your code plug software to your computer, and there's places that you get that. The most favorite site of mine, if you have an Anytone radio, is to go to bridgecomsystems.com. They have them all. You can find them. They're very organized. The second hint is, once you get your software loaded, connect your cable up to your radio, turn your radio on, and read the radio. So the code plug software, or the CPS, knows what version of radio you have and makes sure that your CPS software matches the version of the radio software that you have in your radio. The next hint is you want to save that file. Even if it's straight out of the box new, save that file, because you always got to have somewhere to go if you screw it up. And the easiest way is to go back to the last place that you knew it worked and reload that and start over again. The second thing is, use a naming convention that makes sense for you, but either date it, version number it, all kinds of tricks so that you know which is the most current file that was in your radio. So that when you go back 2 months later to modify it, you don't have to scratch your head and go, what was the name of that last software that I actually loaded into my radio? The last code plug. I use a kind of a simple system. I have the name of the radio. I have the software version of the radio, which is the same as the CPS software, and I date them. So if I make one the next day, I'll put a new date on it, so I know that's the next iteration of the software. If you don't, I guarantee you'll mess yourself up and you'll get confused. It's very easy to do. And this works even if you're programming your Fusion radio, or your D-Star radio, or your analog FM radio. You know, date or name your files so you know where you're at. The other hint that I see, and this does happen from time to time, turn off your radio before connecting or disconnecting the programming cable. You may get lucky and unplug it and it'll work, but I have heard of tales of guys that have done that. It's corrupted the radio, and then you've got a whole host of things you have to do to get it back. So the easiest thing to do is just turn it off, then unplug it, or turn it off and plug it in. Come on. Well, I didn't want it here. So step number one, after you get that far, is you got to go find the information. Well, where do you get it? Individual repeater websites like the Missouri Digital Group. We have all the information you need for programming your DMR radio on our repeater on our website. A lot of them out there do. Like Riverbend Club has a repeater, that sort of thing. The other big one is Repeater Book. Now, the most accurate information should be what's on the club's website. The next accurate information is repeater book, but beware, it can be bad, because I made some changes to our repeater, and repeater book hasn't caught up in spite of me hounding them. Then the next one is you go to the Brandmeister website. If you know the ID of the repeater, you can get that information there. Fellow hams are also a good source, particularly in the area, as to what you need to know for programming that particular repeater. So if you look at our website, here's the information on our website. This is under our tab called DMR. And we give you everything you need to know, and then some. We tell you the frequency, we tell you the offset, we give you the color code. You can see it up there, color code 2. Now, where did we get that? That's assigned by the Missouri Repeater Council for State of Missouri, just like CTCS tones are now assigned. The time slot and talk group information, particularly the time slot, we assigned what talk groups and what time slot on our repeater. And every repeater owner does that. And you need to follow that convention, or you may raise the ire of the repeater owner if you don't. So as you can see down here at the bottom, we have the information for what you should do on time slot 1. We have the information for what you should do on time slot 2 on our website. So like I talked, we give you the talk group number for KC-wide, and we tell you it's on time slot 1. We'll show you where that information goes. And we give you the talk group numbers for what's full-time on time slot 2, which is Missouri statewide, STL Metro, and Missouri Aries talk groups are on that time slot, full-time. What does full-time mean? It means anytime anybody talks in those talk groups anywhere in the world, it comes out our repeater. You can talk on time slot, as we mentioned. If you want to use another Brandmeister talk group, you can go to time slot 1, program it in your radio, key your radio, and connect to that one. We don't care. Have fun. From that aspect. Most repeaters that I've run across in my travels, time slot 1 is the playground, time slot 2 is locked down to local talk groups that everybody uses from that standpoint. Any questions so far? Yes?
You've got listed there talk group 4000 to disconnect.
What's that?
You've got listed there talk group 4000 to disconnect.
Yes. In Brandmeister, if you connect up to a talk group, let's say the one in Sweden, when you're done, if you switch a channel and have it programmed with talk group 4000 and key on it, it will disconnect that repeater from that talk group and return it back to normal operation. It's the same as Wires X. If you're done with the Wires X room, other than the default STL Metro on our repeaters, we would like for you to press the buttons and disconnect, and let's connect it back up to the normal Wires X room. In the DMR world, you disconnect from that particular talk group.
What if you don't disconnect?
What's that?
What if you don't disconnect?
It will eventually time out with no local traffic. And if it doesn't, one of the control ops will come in and clean it up later. But generally, I find it will time out after a while on Brandmeister. Most of these are with no local activity. After about 10 to 15 minutes, they'll time out. No, it does not. Unlike D-Star, it's silent. DMR and Fusion are silent. They connect and disconnect without saying a thing. Where D-Star, if you connect, unless you're on a hotspot, and that's a different story. With D-Star, it will tell you it's disconnected or it's connected when you do that. Here's an example of a repeater book. Again, you've got everything you need. You've got your frequency, your offset, your color code, And then there's this button called Open Talk Group View. It's normally closed, but if you open it, it shows you the same information. You know, what they've assigned to time slot 1, which is right here, and what they've assigned to time slot 2 on their particular repeater. Let's see if I can get there we go. So, you know, they got a couple assigned to time slot 1, and they got a few more assigned to time slot 2. Again, that's entirely up to the repeater owner from that standpoint. And that can change. And so that's why, unless they keep repeater book updated, you can get behind on that. So what do we do? Now we've got all that information. So we've got, you know, our color code, you know, frequency, offset, color code, time slot, talk group ID, all that sort of stuff off the websites and the web. So okay, now I got everything I need to know. What am I going to do? How am I going to get this in there? Most CPSs look very similar, but there can be differences. I'm using the Anytone right now. That's the most popular radio. So the first thing you want to do, if it's brand new, is enter your name and your ID number right here in this common setting. So you go down to where it says radio ID list. You double click on an open line if it's new, and then you enter your radio ID, which you got from radioid.net. You enter your call sign. You can also put a dash in your name there. And the reason you want to do that is called talker alias, and we'll get to that in a minute. When you put that in there, you hit OK, you've got that part. Now, you don't have to go back and change that. Now, notice they give you a lot of lists, so you can have a lot of radio IDs and call signs in here. You only need one radio ID. They are a precious resource across the world, are only sharing about 65,000 IDs. So you don't want to use a lot. But you could have a case of a husband, wife, or both hams, and they're different calls, and they might have different IDs, and you can actually program the radio to switch. So one channel might be his and one channel might be hers, but it could be the same talk group. The next thing you want to do in the common settings is enable talker alias on receive. What is talker alias? Talker alias is that call sign name that you put in. It's a data field in the bit stream that's sent out. Why do you want to do that? Recently, Brandmeister and most networks and most repeaters, particularly the commercial ones and the bridge comms with the MMDVM boards running Pi-Star, all can now use talker alias and send that out over the air. So what that does is allow your call sign to go out over the air. Now, most DMR radios have a database in them of everybody's call sign. But as you know, new people come on. You constantly have to update that database. You might have an older radio that won't hold, 300,000-400,000 contact information. So with the talker alias, that goes out over the air, and then the radio can display the call sign and not just the number. It actually will display both of them. But you have to turn it on to see it. So I recommend to people, even newbies, turn it on. A prime example is on Kansas City Wide. You'll see talker alias pop up because some of their stuff's coming from Fusion. That data has to be passed over to DMR so that it will be displayed. So you set that up to contact alias. Contact alias is the database in the radio. You want it to go to that first, and then you want to use talker alias second. So if it goes to that database and it doesn't find anybody, but it sees a call sign and name in the talker alias, it will display that to you. So it's very handy. The data format is always ISO 8, and it's default, so leave it there. And the talker alias settings are right down here in the CPS for the anytone. So you want to look for those. Step number 3. We got our data. We've got all the common settings set up. The next thing you want to do is enter your contact information. Your talk group information. If you're new, you got to look up all the talk groups that you want to use, and you got to put them in the radio first. The good news is once you put a talk group in the radio, you can reuse it across channels, across repeaters, across hotspots. So you only really do it once. So the first hint is you can use the same talk group can be used for different networks. So you need to use a labeling convention so that you know which is which. So like, for example, talk group number 91 is worldwide on Brandmeister. On TGIF network, it happens to be 114. On the old Seabridge DMR networks, it was number 1. So now I got 3 talk groups named worldwide, but they're on different contact numbers, or different talk group numbers. So you need some sort of convention when you're programming your radio so you know what's worldwide on what network. So it gets to be a little confusing. Hint number 2, the call type is always group call on a talk group, because it's a group of people that are talking together, so it's group. You can have what's called a private call, but that's only a one-on-one call, and you generally don't want that. There are some exceptions, but we won't go into those. So what you're going to program is the contact/talk group. So you select that, you get a display like this here, which has all kinds of information on it. Each one of these lines is a talk group that I've programmed in my radio. To change one or to add is simple. To change one, you double click on the line that you want to change. To add one, you go down, it's not shown here, but you basically double click on an empty line, it brings up this box, and here's where you put the information in. You give it a name. In this case, I call it BM for Brandmeister, and I dash Kansas City Wide. So guess what that is? That's the Kansas City Wide talk group. It's on the Brandmeister network. It's a group call, so I don't do anything because the default is group call. And I entered a talk group ID that I know is for Kansas City Wide. This is one of those, if you search on Brandmeister for Kansas City Wide, you won't find it, because it's a 6-digit talk group ID, and Brandmeister has a policy they don't alpha label 6-digit talk group IDs. Go figure. Wish they would, but so unless you know it, what it is, you have a little trouble finding it. That's why I said, beware. So you enter that number in there, you hit OK, that's in your radio. When you program it, you're ready to go. And that's how you get all your talk groups in the radio. That list, you see I've got 57 and it goes on down the page. I didn't create that in one day. Every time I made a change and I added a new talk group, it goes to the list, so that if I reuse those. So if I program up a channel for another repeater, like in Kansas City, DMR, I don't have to enter Kansas City Wide again, or Brandmeister Worldwide if it's on Brandmeister. I can reuse those as I create those channels. Any questions? All right. Step number 4, create the channel. There's several hints associated with this. Hint number 1, don't forget the TX permit settings. This is confusing for a lot of people, but basically it tells the radio when to transmit and how to transmit. The correct setting, anybody that's an expert in DMR is going to tell you, is same color code. So your radio won't transmit on a frequency that you've programmed for color code 2 and it sees any other color code there. And that's to prevent interference. So you don't, you'll get a reject tone instead of a permit tone. So you want to set it for same color code. Hit number 2, set to DMR mode. For repeaters, you set it to repeater. For hotspots, you set it to DMO simplex, which is the default. Why is this important? As software has changed, particularly with Brandmeister, if it's not repeater on a Brandmeister repeater, you will not access the repeater because the software, the data stream doesn't match what Brandmeister is looking to see. Hit number 3 is to enable talker alias transmit, so that you transmit talker alias for those people who, for some reason, haven't kept their database up to date or don't have a database in their radio. At least they can see who you are, besides just a number. And of course, hams always want to see the call sign, so this is the best way to get the call sign out there. If somebody has a radio without and it supports talker alias, they can see it. And the channel type is digital for DMR, because you can put analog channels in this radio as well.
Question.
Yes?
So if you're going to be using a hotspot one time, but the other route, another time, you program it in twice,
Yes.
and that way you just switch to whatever one you're using.
Yes. So we'll talk about that when we get to zones. You might have a zone that's the repeater and a zone that's your hotspot. You have channels for all the talk groups for your hotspot and channels for all the talk groups on the repeater. Okay, when you get into the channel field, when you look down here, you come over here, you see channel, you click on channel, you get this display, and this is part of a very long display. So if you double click on an existing channel, it'll come up and you can edit it. If you double click on a blank line, you can get a new channel. And then you can create one from scratch. Back out here. Come on. There we go. So you get ready to enter a channel. Here's the screen you will see. Up at the top is the channel name, whatever you want to call it. You can get as creative or uncreative as you want. I strongly recommend do not use channel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you won't know what you're doing. You have the Talk TX permit. See that coming straight down? It's called, and there I have selected same color code from the drop down. Question?
I have about 20 DMR talk groups in my radio. They're all exactly the same frequency going down. How does that work?
How's that work?
Yeah.
So you've got a hotspot or a repeater. Well, when you get them all programmed, then you will put them in a zone so you can see them on the radio. So as long as you have them named what they are, then you just change your channel selector knob to what you're looking for. If you want to do, if they're all in the same repeater, you basically can, let's see if I can go back. If you go back into this field, this is kind of, let's say you're programming for your hotspot. Go back to my CPS. I'm going to go into channel. And I'm going to go down here to one of my hotspots. This is my Zum spot. And let's say I was going to put Kansas City Wide in there, or basically another talk group. With some of the CPS, it depends, right, Cliff? It always depends. You can do a copy, and you can do a paste. And see what it did? I copied Kansas City wide, and I pasted it. Notice it changed the name, so I have to go back and rename it. And it, by the way, won't let me save it again. I mean, you can, but it will give you some error messages. But basically, I saved it. I can save it. And then I can open that one up by double-clicking it. And now I can go in and modify it. So if I'm putting in channels for a hotspot or a repeater, I'm going somewhere and I'm setting up a repeater, I will copy and paste however many channels I want. Then you basically go in and you modify each one of them to whatever new talk group you want.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is that a problem to have 20 different talk groups applied to one repeater?
No, it is not. Repeaters don't care as long as they're different, because you need it. Like on our repeater, you could have however many you want. You can have a bunch of them on slot 1 that you want to switch to every once in a while, and you just program them in. Your hotspot, you can have as many as you want to program in your radio. And of course, to switch your hotspot, you just key it, and it'll switch to that talk group.
How do you program in the disconnect? You have to do every single repeater has its own.
No, if they're all on Brandmeister network, and I think it works the same for TGIF, it's network dependent, you put that in. I have, see if I got an example here. I'm going to just say cancel that, and when I save this, I will not save it. I'll go down to our repeater. See, here I have Brandmeister disconnect, and I program that in. So as I'm going, as you can see, like it's showing you, I've got, same color code. I got a scan list, but we're not going into that. I have this set as repeater because I'm on my repeater. I have Brandmeister disconnect as a selected talk group. My radio ID, the color code, what slot I'm on, in this case, slot 1.
Okay.
All in there.
So every repeater you'll have to have a channel just to disconnect.
Just for disconnect, you have to have a channel. That's the bad thing about, well, you don't have to have if you want to get really good at using the keyboard on your radio. You can program all this in on the fly. Most people don't, unless they're traveling and they've got to do something in a hurry. They can program it in. On the fly, it's easier than when they started.
Can you just dial in 4,000 and?
Yeah, you can change the talk group on the any tones by just going in, changing the talk group on the channel you're at, and selecting it, and away you go. Okay. Just remember that if you did that on top of a contact or talk group that you normally use, then you need to go and change it back. Otherwise, the radio, that one's always going to be disconnect. I recommend programming it in for any hotspot, any repeater that you program in. Always put your disconnect channel in there just to have it. It's simple to do. So, let's see. Getting back to the slideshow here. All right. Yeah, here we go. You see that? No, it's not showing. All right. So again, you double click on an existing one, you double click on a blank to get to that. Back to where we were. We talked about the repeater. There's a checkbox down here for set talker alias. And up here is the color code, the slot information, and the contact information, which is the talk group. Now this CPS works, you have to click on this. This is a button up here. I lost my mouse. Here we go. So you have to click on this, and when you do, here we go. It brings you to a different screen, which is all your talk groups. The current one that you're on will show up, as you can see there. It says STL Metro. It gives the number and a group call. If you want to change it, you select another one in that list. You double click on it, it will then take you back to the channel screen and it will have changed. So this is where it's nice if you copy a bunch of channels in there and then you go to each one, you double click on that, because when you copy a channel, everything copies. So the only thing that you will have to change on each channel, depending on the repeater, is the slot and the talk group. Two things you have to change. Everything else is the same when you do a copy. So that kind of gets you your channel set up. Any questions on that so far?
George, when I set mine up, it's been a year ago, I had to go out and find and import a list of those different talk groups into my CPS. Is that still required to go out and get a current list of talk groups?
No, well, it depends on the CPS of the radio.
Okay. It was an anytone.
The anytones, you could just add them in as you go. You don't have to bring a whole list in. I recommend not bringing a whole list in, because that list could be thousands long. And you saw that grid. Now you have to hunt that grid for every one. My recommendation is bring in what you need, get rid of the rest of it, so that you're not sorting through all that when you're making a change. So I have never done an import because of that. I just don't want all the extra junk. Okay, any other questions on the channels before we get off that? Okay. So now we got our channels. Now the last thing you have to do is assign that channel to a zone. You know, that collection of channels that you want displayed. This trips more people up than anything else. They get that whole channel set up. They're so anxious. They skip to the next step. They save it, well, they're supposed to. They program it in the radio, they go to that zone, and it's not there. And they kind of go, ah. So then they go back in, and they have to assign it. Hint number one, the same channel can be assigned to multiple zones. Don't know why you want to do that, but you can. You might have my favorites and then everything else in the world that I might want to talk to on this repeater. You know, or you may have a repeater like, well, an example, I did this actually. I have individual repeaters programmed into my radios for Kansas City because I go there a lot. So if I'm in Mission, I've switched to Mission. If I'm in, KC proper, I switch to one of the KC proper ones. Well, I kept doing that, and then I go, there's only really two talk groups that I want to listen to. It's BYRG and Missouri Statewide if I'm in Kansas City. So what I did is I created a zone, and I just put in that zone those channels on those repeaters for those two talk groups, and I put them in order. So now I'm on one zone. All I do is change the selector on the top to which repeater for BYRG that I want to be on, or which repeater for Missouri Statewide I want to be on, or STL Metro. So that's one of the reasons why you might want a couple of different zones for something like that, particularly if you travel. So, in that case, the same channels are in two zones. You can use zones to organize your radio. So, if you got a hotspot, you got a zone for a hotspot. If you got two hotspots, you can have a zone for each hotspot, or you can have one zone for both hotspots, depending on how many talk groups you got, how you want to do it. And you can have a zone for particularly where you want to travel. I go to Albuquerque, I got an Albuquerque zone. It's got multiple repeaters in that zone, multiple channels, various talk groups that I'm interested in, all in that zone. Hint number 3, name the zone something that makes sense to you. The default is zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4. Not very informative. I'm sure all of you that have radios have done that, where you've programmed up a new zone and you forgot to change the name. You go, what's this zone 1 here that shows up in my radio? And you go, I forgot to change the name. So you click on the zone, you get a list of your zones that you've got programmed in your radio. If you want to add a double click on an existing line to edit a zone, double click on an empty line to add a new zone. And when you do that, you get the zone screen. The zone screen gives you a list of all the available channels in your radio. Every last one of them. You can change your name here, and then you select, using those double chevron arrow buttons, what channels you want in that zone. So you go down that list, you scroll down, you find them, and you click on that, and it'll move them over to the zone that you've named. Then, if you don't like the order, because it's going to move them over in channel order, numerical channel order, you use the up and down arrows, and you move that particular channel up in order so that when you click the knob on the top, it comes up in the order that you want them to come up with. And if you don't like it, you go back in and change it. And when you're done, you click OK. And you've now saved that zone. Any questions around zones? Again, it's just a collection of channels that you've named that allows you to, using the zone button on your radio, you can select a zone for that group of channels and then go from there. So you can have lots of channels, lots of zones. It's up to you. Last thing you do, before you write, you save. You click the button up at top with a little file. Everybody knows how to save, right? Save first, write second. Always do that. You know why? Occasionally, Microsoft and the Chinese programmers don't agree with one another, and the CPS will shut down. And guess what happens to all that hard work you just did? Down the drain. So rule number 1, and how do I know? Done it many a time, is save first, write second. It's gotten a lot better. I came from the TYT MD380 days, and it was notorious for crashing on write. Notorious for crashing on write. So that kind of does it. For the anytones, you basically have to remember to set the COM port if it's the first time in the code plug, otherwise it will not write. Then you hit the little handy talkie icon, or you can use program write to the radio. There's 2 ways of doing it. It will say, write data to radio, do you wish to continue? And you say, okay. The next thing you want to do is tell it, read or write objects, you want to tell it what to write. There's 2 things that you can write to the radio. The digital contacts list, which is that database, which today is about 350 to 400,000 contacts, call signs. It's big. It takes a while. If you're making small changes, you don't want to wait for that to write to that radio. So you select other data. Doesn't make sense, but it's other data. You select other data, you hit OK, you'll get a progress bar, and then in the end, if you've successfully written, you'll get the right data complete. And you successfully edited, modified, or created a new code plug, and you put it in your radio. Step 7, test. You could program your radio and then rush out the door, and then you get out somewhere and you find out, oops, it didn't do what I wanted it to do. So what I always do is I test it, I unplug it from the cable, turn it off, unplug it, and then I go back through and check the zones to make sure I put channel in the zone, and everything's in the right order that I want to see it in, and all that stuff before I get away from the computer. Yeah, it's just good practice to test. I came from an IT world, so you change, you test. You test before you get out in the field and find out you didn't do it right. And mistakes happen. I still screw up every once in a while. What's next? You got to learn how to import digital contact lists. If you've gotten a radio from somebody and you've never updated the contacts list for 5 years, I can guarantee you there's a lot missing. That is a whole presentation on how to do that. Because some radios, like the 878 version 1, only take 200,000. Canada and the US and some can start to approach that, but you can't put the whole world in an 878 version 1. You can put the whole world in an 878 version 2 today, but you may not be able to tomorrow. The database grows, but the radio's limited by memory, so you have to learn how to do that. You need to probably learn how to create a scan list. There are good resources to do this, and if you're still confused, we'll have I'll give you the PowerPoint, put it out on the website. There are other resources that you can use to learn more in depth about programming your DMR radio. The first one that I always recommend is support.bridgecomsystems.com. They have a lot of good information there. If you go to their website, their help center, they've got a lot of good information on what to do, some of their products. So like if you got an 878 version 2, you can go in here. Now you got all this firmware, all kinds of stuff. They also have a lot of good videos out there on YouTube on how to do all this. And if you happen to buy your radio through Bridgecom, you get access to Bridgecom University, which gives you tons more information and videos to program your radio. Plug Bridgecom there for a minute.
Question.
Yes?
Okay, to get that Bridgecom University, what if you buy the Bridgecom radio through some vendor? You get that, or you have to go through Bridgecom?
You have to buy the Anytone straight from Bridgecom. However, if you search Bridgecom on YouTube, most of the videos are out there that you would find through Bridgecom University.
No, people wouldn't do that.
What's?
People won't do that.
Actually, Bridgecom put them out there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they used to charge for the service, and now I keep getting notices from them saying, come on up, we're having a group coming up for people who just started.
Oh yeah, if you're on their mailing list, you get lots of emails.
I bought my radio from them.
If you bought your radio from them, you're in Bridgecom University with no problem.
They are coming to Winterfest.
Yep, you can bug them there.
They're located in Missouri.
Yeah, they're located in Smithville. It's north of Kansas City.
If you take your radio to them, they'll program it there while you wait.
Yep. They'll be at Winterfest. I don't know who's coming from them. I actually am friends with the owner of the company. I've known them for a long time. I've known Ron for a long time. He's also a fellow alum from Missouri S&T. Give them a plug. And so every time I see him, I bug him about something. Give him a hard time.
You're the reason they're coming.
Huh?
I'm pretty sure you're the reason they're coming.
Could be, because I was griping at him last time why he didn't show up. I said, Ron, you got to come to Winterfest. It's not that far to drive across the state.
Yeah, I bought their first 220, 440, 2-meter 440
Yeah,
before they even had the licenses to sell them.
I've got their little 220 radio. Several guys in the club. I know Max has got one. That's a great little radio. I don't know why they quit selling it, but. So you got YouTube. You've got our website with information. If you're really stumped, shoot me a question. info@modigitalgroup.org gets to me. I generally answer, don't expect immediate. Sometimes life gets in the way. And number one, and the last but not least, plug for Winterfest, we have tables at Winterfest. I will be there. I usually have a vast number of people standing around asking questions. That's why we come, is to help people out. We'll address Fusion, we'll address D-Star, we'll address DMR. So if you still got questions, go home this week, try making changes. If you're still lost, see us at Winterfest. I'll be more than happy to talk to you. And if I don't have the answer, I'll get your information. We'll get it and get back to you. For free. That's part of what we do. I'm also Missouri Section Technical Specialist, so this is what ARRL wants me to do, is to come out and talk to clubs and help people out with technical stuff. So that's part of what I do as well. That's why I make these presentations. Okay. Any other further questions about programming your DMR?
I've never used it. I got my DMR last year, and, never got around to programming it or anything. What is the radio protocol for using it? If you're using a hotspot, do you have to use your call signs and then log in, or how do you have to every 15 minutes put your call signs out there, or does your radio do it? Or?
Most people do the standard on a repeater. Every 10 minutes or so they ID. Keep in mind, yes, technically from the FCC standpoint, you wouldn't have to ID because that number is tied to your call in a database which is readily and freely available. So it meets the rules. But I don't know too many amateurs that don't every few minutes, every number of turns on the repeater, so to speak, or the hotspot, throw out their ID. That's just kind of standard. The repeaters like ours actually CW ID the repeater call. You will never hear that like you do on an analog, because that's done in analog during a dead time to meet the FCC requirements, because that's what was required for commercial repeaters. The bridge comms with the MMDVMs don't do that as readily as the commercial ones do. But yes, so the common practice. The other common practice is, because of scan list and scanning, I always advise people, I get on, I'll say, this is, and Bill knows, I'll say, WB0IIS St. Louis Metro. Why do I do that? Because Bill could have a scan list that's looking at a lot of talk groups, and he hears my call, WB0IIS, but he hasn't had a clue as to what talk group I'm on. But the minute I say WB0IIS St. Louis Metro, he knows if he's not on Metro but heard me to switch to St. Louis Metro to talk back to me. So that's kind of the protocol that most people follow, right? I see a lot of head shaking. That's how it's done. So you just basically announce your call and what talk group you're on.
So if I were to tune up your repeater in time slot 1, would it tell me what talk group I'm hearing?
No.
So I couldn't hop into the conversation. I'll have to wait for someone else to announce it.
Well, if there's a conversation going, you could hop into it. If you're hearing it on your radio,
I'd have to be in the right talk group to hear it.
you'd have to be in the right talk group to hear it. You can hop on it. If you're not in the right talk group,
I get silence?
you get silence.
Okay.
Except most of these radios now have promiscuous mode built into them. And that's some button pushes that says, listen to all traffic on slot 1. Oh, by the way, press the next button the next time and it says, listen to all traffic on slot 1 and slot 2. Now you're hearing anything that's coming out of that repeater. That's even more important to know what talk group they're on.
So then if I hopped on,
You had better be on,
disconnect them from
no.
their talk group? Okay.
But let's say I'm on Kansas City wide and you hear me in promiscuous mode, but you don't have Kansas City wide on a channel on your radio. When you key up, you're going to whatever's selected on this knob, not what the radio's telling you audio-wise.
That
But-
wouldn't disconnect them from the talk
No,
group?
it will not.
Okay.
The only way you're going to disconnect a talk group is to actually key up with the disconnect talk group on your radio. Which then would probably make a lot of people
Yeah.
concerned. Nice way to put it. So,
Is that St. Louis Metro, is that on the Wires X also?
there is a St. Louis Metro on the Wires X. As of today, they are not crossed over to Fusion. That's something that we need. The group that started St. Louis Metro is a group of us. Kyle was involved in that originally. The AT&T Club, Missouri Digital Group, started the St. Louis Metro Wires X. That's been linked by AT&T Group to FCS 093 or 5, which is St. Louis Metro Fusion Reflector. But we haven't taken the step because that's some software, computer programming, a bunch of chips to make that transition from DMR to Wires X to Fusion connection. So right now they're independent. If you want St. Louis Metro on DMR, you're only on DMR. If you're on St. Louis Metro on Fusion, you are on Wires X and the Fusion reflector for St. Louis Metro.
George, there's one other bit of protocol that I'd like to throw out that's nice on DMR. Again, not mandatory, but because all of this stuff is connected through the internet, sometimes the internet takes a dump and will cut somebody out in the middle of what you're saying.
Yes.
So it's awful nice, and most of the guys that are active on DMR, when they're through making their speech, they will hand it off to someone or say over or whatever, so that you know they were through.
Right.
And it wasn't just the underlying infrastructure that quit.
Yeah.
It does happen.
But it does happen. I'm talking to Bill, and he's on his hotspot, I'm on the repeater, he goes away. You know, that sort of thing. The other thing is you will have, you'll lose people in mid-conversation because they drop out. Typical digital stuff.
I got a question. I want to read you something I can't understand. I registered through the OMDG repeater for D-Star.
Right.
I went into the registration. It says, yes, you're registered, but your registration to the D-Star system has been rejected because you're already partially registered on K0MDG. What does that mean? Registering on more than one gateway system is not supporting and cause complications.
Did
I
you?
haven't registered nobody else.
I don't know. Get me with me afterwards, and I'll have to
Okay,
get your call and take a look.
all right, thanks.
I can go into the database and see what's going on.
All right,
If you give me your call and your email,
okay,
I'll take a look at that and get back to you on it.
thank you.
Not a problem. Any other questions? Well,
About a year ago, I programmed a zone with the MDG repeater on it, and I was just noticing I can still get on St. Louis Metro on it, but I can't get worldwide anymore.
yeah. Go back to the website.
So your code plug's never done.
Your code plug's never done. If you go back to our website, go to the DMR info. Come on, web. I thought I was connected. I'm still connected. But it's not taking me there. All right. Well, let me go back to the slide. That's why I like to. There we go. Right below it says talk group and time slot information. When we made the switch to Brandmeister, we were on K4USD network, which happens to have disappeared off the face of the earth because the guy that's running it, I think, has some medical issues or something, and it's done. Their server crashed. They didn't do anything else with it. on Brandmeister, talk groups below 90 are reserved. Therefore, the old worldwide talk group is no longer valid on Brandmeister. However, if you look here, I give you what you need to change those to. So now your challenge is go back into your code plug, look at this, change 1 to 91, 3 to 93, 13 to 913, and 133 to 3100, and you'll be back in business. So, what?
What do they have going on below 90?
I have no idea why they did that, but I think they wanted to stay clear of what the Seabridge networks were doing when they created it. So we give you all that information. So if you're on our repeater and something doesn't look right, go to the website because we generally have that information there. It's www.modigitalgroup.org. Click on the DMR tab and it'll take you right there. And that's what you have to do. That change was made back in September. I see some people trying Talk Group 1 when I look at my Brandmeister dashboard and I go, well, hopefully they'll get the message that it doesn't work. So if you aren't hearing anything on worldwide, that's why. So just make that change and you'll be back in business in no time. Anything else? Oh.
Any hints on radios?
Yes.
Is it legal to QSO on DMR?
Yeah. You can. There's some, some contests don't include that because it's internet, but there are some contests that are internet-based, DMR-based. Bridgecom runs one.
Do you run nets on DMR?
There are some nets. Kansas City Wide runs nets.
Missouri Digital Group doesn't?
We don't.
Okay.
We provide systems, and that's about the extent. That keeps us busy as it is. But if you don't have a Fusion radio, you got a DMR radio, and you're interested in Kansas City Wide, program up slot 1 to Kansas City Wide. The information's on our website, and you'll hear all kinds of nets. They have a POTA net. They have a drive time nets. They got a YL net. What else do they have? A bunch. And they got a website out there. If you Google Kansas City Wide ham radio, you'll find it. Okay, well, thanks for your time. Hopefully this is helpful.
I was just saying, any tips on what radios to look at? I know your Anytone is really your favorite, it sounds like, but are there any other comparable alternatives?
There are a lot of them out there. There's some of them that are basically the same as an Anytone with a different brand on them. They look just like the Anytones. BTEC, which is kind of a version of Baofeng, has some. Stay away from the early Baofeng DMRs that you might find in a flea market. They did not implement the DMR protocol correctly, and that really riles people up. But the later versions of that, Radio Oddity has some fairly good ones. They're all, probably the most popular is the Anytone or the Anytone variants that are basically the Anytone with a different name on them. They're basically the same radio, pretty close into firmware. These will do. This is Kansas City Wide, and there's a JA on there right now. And when he popped up, he wasn't in my contact list, so Talker Alias popped up and gave me his call sign. So it's kind of interesting. So, yeah, there's a lot of them. Alinco makes a pretty good one. I bought at Dayton a later model Baofeng for like $75-50. It's not bad, but the difference is going to be the feature sets and how easy they are to program. The cheaper they are, the less features, they get a little more difficult to program. It's been my experience. What?
And if you just want to play around and try it, there's Droid Star and
Droid Star, all those.
You have to go through all the same registration sites to get all your IDs and everything, but
Then you can play all kinds of networks, and
right.
you still got to know the talk contacts, talk group information has to go in, all that sort of stuff.
So is that the 878 you have?
This is 878 UV2. I've got an 878 version 1. I had an 868. Since I support all these, I have pretty much, if you look at my selection of any tone code CPSs, I got them all. Because somebody will send me a code plug for an earlier version. And I go, okay. If I don't have it, I go to Bridgecom, I get it, help them make changes. Okay. Thank you. If you got any other questions, see me afterwards or come to Winterfest. I'll be there.
You should all be there. Be there and buy a radio there.
I'm sure Bridgecom will be selling them.